Hi, and welcome to Power Play. I'm Mike LeCouture. Tonight, will this move the needle on affordability?
Now, it costs about 10 times your income to buy the average house.
Bringing down costs so that Canadians can get ahead. That's what we've been relentlessly focused on.
As Canada's unemployment rate remains at a multi-year high, the federal government is coming through on a string of affordability promises. Today, they reintroduced automatic tax filing for low-income Canadians. The Canada Revenue Agency is already struggling to meet its current mandate. Can they handle the new program? We'll bring in former Treasury Board President Jean-Yves Duclos. Then, what do the feds want in a pipeline?
Those elements coming together can come together in a pipeline to the West Coast.
What is driving federal strategy on the pipeline debate between Alberta and BC? Or our front bench will break it down. Today we have Muhammad Ali, Gary Keller, Carl Boulanger, and Rachel Aiello. Plus, Israel-Hamas ceasefire.
The central one of these war aims is to return the hostages, all of the hostages.
Hamas has 72 hours to release surviving Israeli hostages as the ceasefire in the Middle East takes hold. We'll bring you the very latest. First, though,
the situation is that millions of lower-income Canadians don't file their taxes, either because they don't have the resources to do so or because they think that their income is too low for it to matter. And that means, too often, that the people who most need benefits often don't get them. This program will pay out hundreds of millions of dollars in benefits in the next few years that would otherwise be left unclaimed, helping our most vulnerable get the supports that they need.
Prime Minister Mark Carney drove out to his suburban Ottawa riding this morning and delivered a series of affordability announcements. There was one new one and two continuations. First, automatic tax filing for low-income Canadians. The federal government is also making the National School Food Program permanent. And the Canada Strong Pass will be renewed over the winter holidays and next summer. Now, that pass gives free admission to national parks and discounts for camping, museums, and more. The PM says automatic filing will help hundreds of millions will deploy hundreds of millions in benefits that are currently going unclaimed. But how will the CRA deliver on that program? Joining us now is Liberal MP and former Treasury Board President Jean-Yves Duclos. Welcome back to Power Play.
Well, good evening, Mike, and good evening to everyone listening.
So the service challenges remain at CRA despite this program. A month ago, on this show, Secretary of State Wayne Long, who does oversee the Canada Revenue Agency, said that it was so bad, quote, Revenue Canada hit rock bottom. So how can you add this new layer of work and expect services not to suffer?
Two things on this. The first one is Secretary of State Long did say there is a significant work being undertaken now at the CRA to meet a 100-day plan to deliver better services to Canadians. And second, one part of that plan is now to, as Prime Minister Carney, I think, nicely and correctly summarized, is to make sure that more Canadians can claim their benefits by having access to an easier way to file their tax return. Many of them, as you heard, believe that it might not be worth their time, or they may not have the resources or the interest to make a tax return. But what happens is that then they miss on the Canada Child Benefit, they miss on the Guaranteed Income Supplement for seniors, they miss on the Canada Workers Benefit for workers. They also may miss on the Canadian Dental Care Plan because they are not found to be eligible, not having submitted their tax return. So for all of these reasons of fairness and efficiency, it's important for the CRA to allocate some of its resources towards that plan.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is denying the benefits that could be coming to more Canadians. I just wonder how they will get them, because according to your own government's numbers, between September 1st and September 5th, only 57% of calls to CRA were answered.
Well, that's exactly the point. So it needs to provide better services. It also needs to acknowledge that many of those calls are made by people who don't have the means and the resources and the understanding to make a tax return. So with the technology that already exists, that technology exists and is working, that technology being expanded to up to 5.5 million Canadians by tax year 2028, the burden on the CRA will be lower, but most importantly, Canadians will have the ability to file their tax return and to get the benefits that they totally deserve.
But Mr. Duclos, if they can't already handle the burden that they're dealing with right now, how can you add more burden to the people who are working for CRA when you consider that the union is saying that wait times for calls right now is 3.5 hours? If you're giving them more work to do, how is that going to help the burden that they already have to deal with? And how will Canadians actually get these benefits if the union says they're already suffering under the work that they're trying to deal with right now?
And that's a fair question. And the answer is what you would have heard just a few weeks ago when Secretary of State Long and Minister Champagne said that the most important problem was the use of technology. No, there were technologies that didn't fit together, technologies that were not being used by the CRA. And that's exactly the point here. The technology exists and is working, but it's not used sufficiently well and sufficiently enough by CRA agents. So they will be switching to that technology, which works really well. The problem is that it is not just not available to those millions of Canadians that would benefit from it and benefit obviously from the benefits that they will get if they are successful at filing their tax return.
So what kind of technology will help? Because the reason I ask about all of this, right now the Union of Taxation Employees have said that 3,000 jobs have been cut at CRA since last fall, including a decision not to renew the contracts for 1,300 call center employees. So is there technology that can really compensate for all of those lack of employees?
No, it has to be balanced. You will also have heard that a number of new employees have been hired, and existing employees have been shifted from areas which require less work to areas like the one we're talking today, where more work is needed. And in addition to a better and greater use of technology, we firmly believe that, again, almost 6 million Canadians by 2028 tax year will have, and low-income Canadians in particular, because this is targeted to lower-income Canadians, those Canadians will find it easier and sometimes quite easy to file their tax return and then get the benefits that are associated with it.
I want to take a wider view at things because, of course, this is one of those affordability measures that your government is putting in the window. A number of polls are showing that Canadians are really concerned about that as one of their top priorities. So what other measures can we expect in the federal budget to help Canadians with the cost of living, as that is top of mind for everyone in this country?
Well, we'll obviously have to see on November the 4th, but two measures have already been announced, not completely implemented because we now need to have parliamentary approval. But one of them is a reduction of income tax, a middle income tax cut for 22 million Canadians. So that's many of those currently listening to us today. Another one is the removal of the GST on the purchase of new homes on the part of first-time home buyers. So this is a very significant benefit, especially for for younger Canadians, a benefit of up to $50,000 on the purchase of a new home. And we'll see what November the 4th budget brings more. But as you know, and as we've heard, and that's important to remind everyone perhaps, is that November the 4th budget will be a budget where we will be spending less on operations, but investing more in the growth that Canadians need to see for better wages and better jobs.
And I want to ask you about that because there is a lot of spending in the upcoming budget. But in 2024, the Parliamentary Budget Officer estimated that the CRA program that is being introduced today could cost between $1.6 and $1.8 billion. And there are a lot of other spending programs, as you had just mentioned, two of them there. There are estimates that the deficit in this budget will be around $90 billion. Is that something that you personally are comfortable with?
Well, the goal is, well, there are two main goals, as I mentioned one of them earlier. So to spend less in order to invest more, but also to bring to zero in about 3 years from now the operational deficit. So that's the deficit of the federal government when it comes to funding its operational expenditures. That's something important, because if we free up resources on operations, we have more resources to invest in Canadians, in businesses, and in workers, and in Canadians like today that need affordability support to make ends meet. So these are the broadest objectives of the budget. Today, as we've discussed, now there are additional measures. One is a national school food program, which is again targeted to lower income families, at least families with more modest incomes, whose children would sometimes go to school without being fed with an empty stomach. So this is something that is very appreciated in my riding, certainly, because it not only it reduces poverty, because it's about $800 per family of two children that benefit from the program. It also makes those children grow better, learn better, and help, obviously, in many other dimensions.
I understand all of that, but I wanted to ask you, as somebody who used to be the president of the Treasury Board and essentially had to be the chief accountant for the government and making sure that everybody was staying within their means, are you comfortable standing behind a government budget that says it'll have a $90 billion deficit?
We need to look at where those dollars are invested. Are they invested in the most efficient manner and targeted towards those Canadians that need the support even more than otherwise? So and that is being done again by making the government more efficient, by bringing down operational costs and the operational deficit, and investing more to create more jobs, better jobs, and also, Mike, to acknowledge that we are in the middle of a crisis. Now, we tend to be thinking of Canada as being isolated as we now speak, but Canada is impacted by a world crisis that we have not seen in decades. So in that type of crisis, we need to control what we can control, and that it means investing in jobs and businesses and in supporting affordability for Canadian families.
Okay, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Liberal MP and former Treasury Board President Jean-Yves Duclos, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike, and good evening, everyone.
Thank you. In other news, the first day of the Middle East ceasefire appears to be holding this hour. It comes after Israel and Hamas agreed to the first phase of a U.S.-brokered peace plan, which potentially paves the way to end the two-year war.
We fought during these 2 years to achieve our war aims. And a central one of these war aims is to return the hostages, all of the hostages, the living and the dead.
Palestinians reported heavy shelling in parts of Gaza this morning before the ceasefire kicked in at noon local time. Israeli forces have fully withdrawn troops beyond the agreed-to boundary. Now, Hamas has 72 hours to release surviving hostages. It's believed there are about 20 people still being held. In exchange, Israel will release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Still ahead, Prime Minister Mark Carney wades into the Alberta-BC pipeline fight. We're going to break that down with our front bench. Today, we have Muhammad Ali, Gary Keller, Carl Belanger, and Rachel Aiello. First, though, is the Carney honeymoon over? New polling shows a 10-point drop in optimism amongst Canadians. Nick Nanos breaks down his latest numbers next on Power Play.
Everything costs more. We got 4 million visits to a food bank every single year in Toronto alone. And nobody can afford a home anymore. Used to be a family on a single income could buy a house with a yard. Now it costs about 10 times your income to buy the average house.
We'll take decisions that reinforce the programs that help bring down costs for hardworking Canadian families. And we will build programs that help all Canadians get ahead. Bringing down costs so that Canadians can get ahead, that's what we've been relentlessly focused on since being elected just a few months ago.
Well, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and Prime Minister Mark Carney were both talking about the cost of living for Canadians. That issue has eclipsed Canada-U.S. relations as the #1 concern for Canadians, according to Nanos polling. And new today, Nanos has found that since the summer, Mark Carney has experienced a 10-point drop in Canadians' optimism towards the government. So how big of a problem could that be for the Prime Minister? Well, Nick Nanos is the founder and chief data scientist at Nanos Research. He's also CTV's pollster of record. And guess what? He joins us in studio right now. How you doing, Nick?
Good, Michael. How you doing?
Good. So, as I said off the top or earlier on, is the honeymoon officially over or not?
Well, it's not as good as it was for Mark Carney and the Liberals, that's for sure. You know, the thing is, during the election, there was a lot of hope coming out of the election. And you know, the thing is that Carney's numbers pulled away. Mm-hmm. The Liberal ballot numbers they had a larger gap. But, you know, the thing is that when we look at how people feel, emotions that people would use to describe how they feel about the government in Ottawa, not the Liberals or Carney, the government in Ottawa, it was actually pretty positive in terms of the level of optimism. And what we're seeing now is that optimism is eroding. And, you know, the other thing is we've got to remember, 15% said they're angry, another 22% pessimistic. And if you go to, here's a little tidbit, go to the prairies, they're really angry. Much more angry than everybody else, Michael. I don't know if you're surprised. They're still angry.
Well, I mean, I don't want to call it not breaking news, but yeah, certainly not happy. I mean, and when I was looking at the numbers, it seems like it is back to those April levels.
Yeah, it's back to the April levels. I guess the only consolation for the Liberals is that it's not as bad as it was during the darkest days of the Trudeau government, where, you know, the people that said that they were optimistic, I can show it like this. You don't need a board. 7% of Canadians were optimistic when Justin Trudeau was Prime Minister. So even the 10-point drop to 33 is better for the Liberals than under the tail end of Justin Trudeau.
And so how has that also reflected the party support? I mean, the numbers seem to be narrowing between the two parties.
Absolutely. You know, coming off the election, the election was almost a dead heat. Right? Yeah. Between the 43-41, between the Liberals and the Conservatives. The Liberals did have a honeymoon. They pulled away from the Conservatives, especially during the period when Poilievre was kind of seeking to get elected out west in the by-election. But now the gap has narrowed. It's within the margin of error. It's a statistical coin toss right now between the Liberals and the Conservatives. On the ballot numbers, on the preferred Prime Minister front, Mark Carney still has a noticeable double-digit advantage over Pierre Poilievre.
Talk to me about that. You know, I don't call it an incongruence, but how the party brand and Carney's brand seem to be so different.
Well, why don't we say the same thing for both of the front-running parties? So, people still don't like the Liberals and are upset about the last 10 years, but they seem to like Mark Carney. Mm-hmm. When people look at the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre, you know, the Conservatives have a stronger brand right now than Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah.
So it's about Canadians who still want change, think the Liberals have been in power too long, and Pierre Poilievre is kind of like another dimension, not the driver of support for the Conservatives, not in the same way that Carney is driving Liberal support today, at least.
And it's interesting because that election was fought so keenly over Canada-U.S. relations and fighting back against the U.S. And you also have some numbers about how Canadians feel about boycotting travel to the U.S. and buying U.S. items. What's that like?
Absolutely. In the survey that we did, we asked Canadians whether boycotting U.S. goods or boycotting travel to the United States would help or hinder the Canadian bargaining position. You can see that 80% or thereabouts of Canadians, 8 out of every 10, think that these types of boycotts help the Canadian bargaining position. So it's pretty strong right across the board by gender, by region, and stuff like that. Moral to the story, Michael, you poke a bear, it's going to respond.
Yeah,
no,
true,
right? It's what Canadians can do.
True, but you've had Pete Hoekstra, the U.S. ambassador to Canada, and Donald Trump, both kind of push back against that, saying that they don't appreciate it. I mean, it was even brought up in the Oval Office this week that, travel to the U.S. is down about 23%. And so while Canadians believe that it is a good thing, it almost seems like it's more of an irritant to the U.S.
Well, maybe if it's an irritant, it's working. Think of it this way.
True.
Like if they didn't care, it'd be like, yeah, sure, do whatever. We can do whatever we want because there's no repercussions. I think the fact of the matter, there are a lot of American enterprises, especially close to the border, that rely on Canadian customers, visitors, all that kind of stuff. And they're having a more difficult time than they have in the past.
Do you think, given the numbers that you are spelling out for us and how Canadians are feeling, that sort of bodes well for how Mark Carney is attacking Canada-U.S. relations, even though it's not the #1 priority for Canadians right now?
Yeah, I think for Mark Carney and the Liberals, they want to talk about Donald Trump and the binational relationship. But, for Pierre Poilievre, his strength, and for the Conservatives, their strength has to do with the cost of living, affordability, inflation, the cost of housing, paying for the groceries and stuff like that. So think of it as a battle of the ballot questions right there, with the Liberals wanting to talk Trump and Conservatives wanting to talk about the cost of living.
Yeah, and we always appreciate that. When you come here, you talk turkey. And that is a happy Thanksgiving reference.
Thanks for not calling me a turkey.
Yeah, never. I would never do that. Founder and chief data scientist at Nanos Research, that's what I'll call him, Nick Nanos. Appreciate that, Nick. In other news, Canada Post mail delivery is set to restart partially. The Postal Union has moved from a full national strike to a series of rotating ones. Here's the negotiator for the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, Jim Gallant.
We were on a full strike in November and December. When we came out of the pause, they called it the government pause in May, we did an overtime strike. We switched that to a flyer ban, which is a strike action, and then we went to a full strike. These things all attract to different things. We're meeting with the minister again next week, and all those things, when you throw them in a bucket and shake it up, what came out is what we wanted to move to a rotating strike, and this is not us backing down.
The company did reply in a statement saying, while postal services will begin to resume next week, uncertainty and instability in the postal service will continue with the union's decision to conduct rotating strikes. It went on to say, shutting down and restarting parts of our integrated national network with rotating strikes has always challenged our ability to provide reliable service to customers. As a result, all service guarantees will be suspended. We have to take a quick break. Then, Prime Minister Mark Carney weighed into the Western pipeline fight today. Our front bench will break down the pipeline politics right after this.
This government believes in nation-building projects, which can, in both clean and conventional energy. Those projects have several characteristics: material economic benefits, linking together different parts of our economy, consistency with our climate objectives, and benefits and participation for Indigenous peoples. So those elements coming together can come together in a pipeline to the West Coast. It depends on the specific proposal.
Are you at all considering repealing either the tanker ban or the emissions cap, yes or no?
It depends. What this government is interested in is in results.
It depends. That's the message from Prime Minister Mark Carney when he was asked if he's considering repealing either the tanker ban on BC's coast or the emissions cap to pave the way for a new bitumen pipeline from Alberta to BC's northwestern coast. Now, both were signature environmental planks of the last Liberal government, and they're two of the few remaining policies that seriously address climate change. But contrast that to the openness from what his Minister of Energy and Natural Resources said before a Senate committee yesterday.
What we have said is to build, you need support of the jurisdiction you build through, and you need the support of First Nations. The proponent, in this case the province of Alberta, needs to attract that if they want to build. That's something between the province of Alberta and the province of British Columbia. We've said we will be a constructive participant in that three-way discussion. The province of Alberta has some work to do.
So where does that leave things as we close in on Danielle Smith's deadline to see it on the next list of major projects? Let's bring in our front bench. Muhammad Ali is a former Liberal staffer. He's now vice president at Crestview Strategy. Rachel Aiello is CTV's national correspondent. We also have Gary Keller. He's vice president at Strategy Corp. He held a number of key roles in the Conservative government of Stephen Harper. We also have former interim NDP national director Carl Belanger. He's now the president of Traction Strategies. Happy Friday. Welcome to everyone. Rachel, I'm going to start with you because Carney's answer there, as we heard your voice, was in response to the question on whether or not he believes a tanker ban would be, or whether or not a pipeline could go to the West Coast. And what's your assessment of him saying that it depends, and specifically on repealing some of those environmental things?
Yeah, usually, Mike, when a politician gives you an answer that starts with "it depends," you think it's probably not going to go anywhere fruitful. That was not the case this time. I think the Prime Minister's answer here was extremely illuminating in saying that he is not ruling out that this could happen. And as you go through his answer, I think the reading between the lines here, if I'm interpreting what the Prime Minister is saying correctly, is that he is saying that they're going to be bringing forward some major projects that, like carbon capture, that will essentially offset some other projects they might approve in the traditional oil and gas sector. So my read was essentially he is saying that he thinks he's going to be able to get away with getting rid of things like the emission cap if he puts in the window carbon capture, other green technology, green energy projects. So that'll be really fascinating to watch. And the political communications level of that is, are those two things going to happen simultaneously? Like, hey guys, tanker ban's going away, but oh, look, shiny other thing. Like, how are they going to balance out the very good number of votes the Liberals have on the West Coast in British Columbia with this push the Prime Minister has to boost up our energy sector? Yeah,
and especially, Mohammed, when you consider they don't really have a lot of votes in Alberta that they have to sort and ridings that they have to please at this point. But at the same time, he's sort of trying to have it all right now, the Prime Minister.
Well, I think one thing that's interesting that I think part of the depends comment is, we heard that Keystone Pipeline was raised with the U.S. president. That's a project that does not need to go through BC, and it allows them to focus on just an Alberta specific, relieves the pressure, because the Prime Minister is also cognizant of these separatist animosity in Alberta. So he doesn't want to fuel more Western alienation. I think he wants to find a solution that works, that still addresses some of the climate change actions that has taken place, but also the realities for the sector. So I think what I would actually look at is how he's going to move forward on potentially a Keystone Pipeline, because that also may address another issue, which is the Canada-US issue.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Carl, because, of course, if he does repeal the tanker ban and emissions cap, those are both demanded by the energy companies. And then you have nearly all of those environmental planks that are gone. Do you think he can afford to do this, since the NDP is essentially in such disarray right now?
Yeah, well, the NDP, is forming government in BC, and you're gonna have to go through that too. And if it comes to national unity, can you pick winners and losers in the federation as prime minister? I think it would be a bad strategy. That's why Keystone came into play, because you can kind of solve two problems at the same time. But more than the federal NDP, maybe benefiting from that environmentalist flank, I think it's inside. I think it's internal. The Liberal caucus, there's many MPs and including some ministers who are very concerned about the direction this government is taking, and they've made it known. And I think the first task of the Prime Minister is to keep his government united, because it's a thin minority that he has right now, and he can't afford to lose them because of these kinds of decisions.
Yeah, and Gary, on that point, there are some key people in there. I think everybody is maybe wondering what Stephen Guilbeault has to say about any of this, because, there's now two pipelines that are essentially on the board, one that is possibly going to BC's West Coast and another one that is going south. So how do you think that Mark Carney can sort of try and keep everybody here happy, or does he sort of risk that kind of caucus division, as Carl was talking about?
Well, frankly speaking, it sounds like Stephen Guilbeault may not be around much longer. Rumors in Ottawa have him heading out the door maybe for a diplomatic appointment in short order. His parliamentary pension vests on October the 19th, just around the corner. So that's certainly something to watch if he departs, because he has been the standard bearer for that Green caucus within both the Quebec Liberals and across the country. Yes, of course, Mr. Carney has some internal management issues to deal with, especially since so many of the current cabinet are people he inherited from the Trudeau government. But he says that he's a different prime minister. Well, the proof will be in the pudding to see if he actually advances this. And one of the challenges with going south with the Keystone Pipeline is, remember, our oil trades at a discount compared to oil going to the West Coast. And in terms of a proponent for the Keystone Pipeline, there's a lot of energy companies who are once bitten, twice shy to say, we dumped billions of dollars into that project. Consider us a little bit shy about taking on another opportunity when the West Coast might be a quicker option, notwithstanding the opposition of BC, which constitutionally doesn't have a leg to stand on, as everybody knows, and Tim Hodgson and Mark Carney know that responsibility is the federal government's alone, and they're trying to put it on BC and Alberta. No, sorry, that's in your camp, Mr. Hodgson and Mr. Carney.
Yeah, and Rachel, it's interesting because while selling it south may also not be diversifying away from the United States, which is something that this government says that it wants to do, at the same time, it seems like it's the easier path because the guy now in the Oval Office is not going to block it. He might want it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is, to your point, something that could kind of help them out in the trade conversation. Because if the Prime Minister is looking at this as we are going to be boosting Canada's critical minerals, Canada's natural resources sector, and we could be selling that to the Americans, something that they want, can we do a trade there? So if that does happen and we are to get a deal on steel and aluminum, how does the Prime Minister play that for Canadians in investing down south? We heard Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre go really hard in the House this week on the Prime Minister's comment in the Oval Office, suggesting that $1 trillion of Canadian investment is going to be going to the U.S. at a time of building Canada up. So there's going to have to be pretty clear messaging that there are Canadian jobs in building that pipeline. It would be Canadian steel, aluminum, trying to find ways to make the case to be, yes, investing down south, but making it still work for us.
And Mohammed, one of the things that sort of really strikes me in this is that, that the Liberals are slowly eroding or taking away different environmental protections that have been put in by the previous government there. So how does he square that when you consider that the book that he wrote entitled Values was all about growing the economy and the environment at the same time? And right now, it may not seem like to a lot of Canadians that he's favoring or that he's doing it equally. It may seem like he's favoring the economy over the environment.
Look, this is a different government. The Prime Minister had a very clear, the economy is really important. I think he's trying to find the right balance.
But it's his book. That's why I say that, right? His book was all about doing both.
Yeah, and I think we haven't, he's only been a Prime Minister for a few months. And I think there is still, to assess his whole term, I think we still have some time for that. But his first major projects, he was approving mining projects that will help with electrification. There are other, he's looking at CCUS to help support that. There are other initiatives he is trying to address and move forward that would also have an environmental angle. So it's not just, I think, the be all or end all with just this one project. I think we have to look at the overall picture, which is what he's trying to do.
Yeah, and Carl, it seems like there's this, I don't say it's an artificial deadline, but certainly Danielle Smith wants to see it on the list by the next tranche, which is supposed to be coming, at the time for the Grey Cup, which is November for people who are not CFL fans. But how much pressure is on Prime Minister Carney to make sure it's on there, even though Danielle Smith's own assessment that her own timeline for giving the assessment on whether or not this is possible is May?
Yeah, I don't see it happening, to be honest, by the Grey Cup. Frankly, I think that's why the move, the Keystone move was there, if only to buy time for the Prime Minister to say to Alberta, I'm working on things. And that's why, you heard Danielle Smith and others in Alberta were really complimentary of these efforts. But at the same time, Keystone has been on the table before, and it's been killed not once but twice by Democratic administration. So who knows if by the time it's ready to go, the Democrats won't be back in the White House and cancel it one more time. That might be the play here, just buy time.
Gary, last to you, especially on the timing of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think Danielle Smith has been on the front foot on a lot of advancing Alberta's interests. She just did a tour through Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto. She got a standing ovation in Montreal at the Chamber of Commerce lunch. Big reception in Ottawa, big reception in Toronto about advancing this timeline. And she knows that by putting it on the Prime Minister's agenda by the Grey Cup, where she's hoping to have it there, she is setting a deadline that definitely puts the decision right into his camp. And I think that's exactly where she wants to. She's been very aggressive compared to, say, David Eby, who's always been playing defense on this, it seems like. And I think she knows exactly what she's doing here to try to advance this and other projects.
Okay, we're going to take one more commercial break. On the other side, Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc, he's back from D.C., and much like the Prime Minister, he came home with no real announcement. Our front bench will get into that right after this.
There are certain sectors, steel, aluminum, autos, forest products, pharmaceuticals, where the Americans have decided are strategic, and they have trade actions against the rest, everybody in the world. And we are negotiating specific sectoral deals with them, which would likely persist with a revised USMCA.
That was Prime Minister Mark Carney today talking about the status of negotiations with the U.S. and how separate bilateral trade agreements could be struck outside of a North American deal. It comes as the minister responsible for trade with the U.S., Dominic LeBlanc, is back from his trip to D.C. In a post on social media, LeBlanc said he had a series of productive engagements with senior American officials. He also said the Canadian team will continue discussions, quote, with their counterparts towards trade resolutions that will bring greater certainty to both of our countries, adding he'll be back in D.C. soon. When asked by reporters today, Prime Minister Carney did note that U.S. President Donald Trump expressed his preference to have a combination of the two, especially in the sectors like steel, aluminum, and lumber. Prime Minister also said, quote, we're looking for things that other countries have not received. So can Canada walk and chew gum at the same time? Let's ask the front bench. We've got Muhammad Ali, Gary Keller, Carl Boulanger, and Rachel Aiello. Now, Mohammed, the Prime Minister did say earlier this week that bilateral agreements alongside CUSMA, and the President did so as well. So do you think that the likelihood is that we will have what is essentially the status quo right now, which is CUSMA, but all of these other sectoral agreements?
I am optimistic that there might be something, and I think back to our discussion on pipelines, I think a Keystone offer was sort of something the President wants, so that, okay, we see an opportunity here, both sectors of steel can benefit from it. So I'm optimistic that there's some relief can come, and I think in comparison to some of the European, the Japanese, who pretty much got no real deal. It was just basically take it or leave it, which is benefiting the Americans and not themselves. I think the Prime Minister just wants to avoid that scenario, that he's willing, that we're so close to anyhow the triggering of the CUSMA negotiations that, well, let's try our best to get some relief so that the negotiations can get a little bit more smoother. And I think I'm optimistic that at least something will come of a framework that can help provide some relief to our sectors.
Yeah, and building on that, Gary, there seems to be an understanding that there will be a baseline tariff on certain sectors, like, you know, a lot of other allies have seen. There's a baseline tariff on a number of other countries. Do you think that that is something that Canadians will have to understand? Because it seems like the Carney government is already there, even though in an interview with Vassy Kapelos on Question Period, you know, you had Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the opposition, who said he would negotiate no tariffs at all. It seems like that's not really in the cards right now.
I think, to your point, I think that when it comes to those across-the-board tariffs, I think Canada will, especially in those industries, will be facing some sort of tariff. You know, Howard Lutnick made it very clear in his comments recently that any deal on certain sectors is going to be America first, Canada second. That is the approach of the administration, and that's not just been the approach of the administration to Canada, but across the board. But I think the challenge for the Carney government is going to be, when are we actually going to see some details? We hear soon, soon, soon. You know, this was a prime minister during the election campaign. He said, the deepening integration of our economy with the United States, including economic and military and defense, is over. In the Oval Office, he said, there's $1 trillion of investments going to the United States. You know, he said a number of things that certainly Canadians did not expect to him. So I think Canadians are going to say, okay, smart guy, when is this going to happen? And this is the challenge that Mr. Carney has with raised expectations all the way along, is when is he actually going to deliver? And I think that's going to be a challenge for him.
It's been a challenge for a while, because we've heard time and time again that it's coming soon. We've heard that in May. We heard that was coming for the June 7 G8 summit. We were told it's coming in September, and now we had a meeting.
August long weekend.
I don't know. The thing is, I'm not as optimistic as Mohammed, and I think the president has been playing this game, President Trump, to win, and that's all he cares about. And the more deals he had, and the more side deal he has, the more chances he has at winning something. And that's what he wants to do. It doesn't make sense from an economic perspective. It's actually hurting Americans. That's why they have these talks of bailouts for the agricultural industry and other industries, because it's actually hurting Americans. But it doesn't matter, because for President Trump, that's what makes it so unpredictable. It's about winning personally, for whatever it means.
Yeah, and Rachel, it seems like it's that zero-sum game, because even in the Oval Office, he said, look, we are in this natural business conflict. They want to build something, but we want to build it. And it's essentially like saying, no, we need all the toys. You can't play with any of them.
Or I want the best toys. We're going to make all these other deals with other countries, and then we'll talk to Canada, because he rightly points out that the economic and trade situation with this country is very different than it is when he's talking to countries abroad. Like, we are directly competing because our supply chains are so deeply integrated, and if you're buying something from Canada, it could be right next door. Like, it's very close in terms of where you're shipping it from. So I think there is a point there, and I think to build further on the we want you to do well, but we want to do better, it was that amazing clip you had in the Oval Office this week of, you know, Mark Carney's a great man, but I want to be a great man too. And I think that is really the mentality that the federal government has to go forward knowing. And I think there needs to be better pre-positioning to the Canadian public that there are going to have to be concessions of some sort. We need to give the president something, a shiny something to point to and say he got it. They've made it clear it's not going to be supply management. So what is it going to be? Is it going to be we're selling critical minerals, Keystone's happening? I think there needs to start to be a bit more communication about what cards are actually on the table and what is the federal government actually considering. The Prime Minister today saying we want something more than other countries have gotten. What is it?
Yeah, Carl, just before I let you come in, Mohammed, I mean, Canada feels, or to Rachel's point, Canada's going to have to bring something to the table and put it on there. And I know she said supply management is, you know, that third rail that we will never touch. However, you know, do you think it's in the cards when you consider it doesn't have to be all supply management? Could be more quotas on dairy and others.
You know, I think that they are going to be reticent to try and open up supply management. I think that the reason of bringing up Keystone Pipeline, whether it disrupts some of the concerns of certain environmentally focused MPs, I think the grand scheme is like, we need to give the president something. And even the comment about like, well, Canada is one of the largest sources of FDI to the United States was also to appeal to the president who seeks and thinks about it from a business perspective, an investment perspective. So he is doing everything possible. And that press conference, I think could have gone really bad, but it didn't. It went actually pretty decently. President wants to find some sort of solution for Canada as well. So I'm optimistic for that reason, is that I think the president and the prime minister came to some general understanding that, like, we can find a solution. I think we both need to give something up here, and we can find that pretty soon, and then we'll have a little bit more of a fulsome discussion on CUSMA.
I think Canadians' patience,
elbows
though, is
up was
waning
so long
soon.
ago, so long ago.
Yeah. Sorry, finish your thought,
point,
Rachel, and then I'll go back to
I think, though,
Carl.
Canadians' patience is waning on soon. It's been many months now, and a lot of economy, businesses, industries are suffering, and it's just hopeful. We're hopeful. We're getting there. Well, Dominic LeBlanc just came back with, as far as we know, nothing.
Yeah.
We were talking for the 2 days coming back from the trip about him staying down there to like tie up the knots and make these deals. That hasn't happened.
Yeah, and Carl, it is one of those things where you sort of look at it, and it's like U.S. President Donald Trump said he could end the Ukraine war in a day. And it sounded like we were going to get this USMCA renegotiation or CUSMA renegotiation very quickly. But I would note that over your shoulder is the province of Quebec. And when we talk about supply management, pipelines, and all of that kind of things, those are all touchy subjects in that province. And do you think that, part of this, one would have to think that part of this is trying to make sure that it's palatable to every province, especially where they have a lot of votes?
Well, and especially when you have a very nationalist government that just tabled the constitution in Quebec, trying to build on Quebec nationalism, and a Parti Québécois who's on the brink of coming back into power. So yeah, you don't want to give more fuel to that separatism fire that does still, exist in Quebec. And this is the danger for Mark Carney. The Prime Minister, is under tremendous pressure to get to some kind of deal to put an end to this trade war, because he promised he would do that during the campaign, and he has not delivered so far. So now the risk is, picking winners and losers and letting go of some of the principles, including supply management. All parties agree in the House. They adopted a law to protect supply management and to say no more concessions. But we've heard that song before. And we've heard it with Donald Trump, actually, and concessions have happened. So there lies the danger. And Prime Minister Carney, if he makes a deal, the question he has to ask himself is is no deal better than any deal? And what price will he pay for that?
Gary, you get the last 20 seconds.
Yeah, and I think this is the challenge. They haven't really created a narrative about very much about what the government is doing. They just throw things out there. And this is the key area where they won the election, was this elbows up approach. Well, this is a very different approach, and it fostered a lot of Canadian nationalism. Will he be able to survive through this with a very different elbows down approach? Time will tell.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it right there. Gary Keller, Carl Belanger, Muhammad Ali, and Rachel Aiello, thank you all for being here. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you as well. We have one more break still ahead, though. We're going to be kicking off the next segment with a little bit of footy. Stay tuned. Just before we leave you, some news from the intersection of sports and politics. Prime Minister Mark Carney will attend Canada's men's friendly match tonight against Australia in Montreal. Now, ahead of the game, the Prime Minister hosted FIFA President Gianni Infantino.
I brought you a little souvenir. No, it's not a souvenir, actually. It's my ticket. It's your ticket. Because you have, of course, to come for the opening game here in Canada. As you can see, row 1, seat number 1, and ticket number 0001, of course, for you.
So that's the Prime Minister's ticket to the first Canadian game on June 12th in Toronto. Let us hope that he does not have to carry that thing around in his pocket. Well, that is your Power Play Week in Politics. I'm Mike Lecouteur. Thanks so much for sharing your time with us. We're off for the holiday Monday, but Vashi Kapelos will be back here on Tuesday. Until then, have yourselves a great weekend, and happy Thanksgiving to you and your families.